All right. Good morning, Doug. Well, lots we could talk about today, but you've written a couple of essays recently in International Man that are very, very interesting that we should talk about here. Whether we get to both of them today or not, I don't know. But uh, one of them relating to lots of news items we see, and that has to do with these kind of psychological problems and despair we see in the newspapers. And I guess if you don't mind, let's talk about that. Let's talk about psychology and your view on that.
Yes, that article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was yesterday even, uh, saying that what percentage of teenage females are suicidal or suffering from severe depression? What was the percentage that they mentioned?
I've got it on the screen now. So it says there's nearly 3 out of 5 high school girls in the US who in this survey reported feelings of persistent sadness or hopelessness in 2021, a roughly 60% increase over the last decade.
Okay, well, I guess it's tough being a teenage girl anytime, but these are big numbers. Whether they're accurate or not, I don't know. And certainly, I don't believe much that comes out of the CDC anymore, which is just a political bureaucracy. But still, with all this stuff about trans and gay and 58 genders and all this type of thing, it's got to destabilize especially young females at a very unstable part of life. And that's not even counting. And of course, this article doesn't really talk about what it's doing to young males, because with the women acting as crazy as they are, if I was a guy dating today, I'd have to be ultra cautious that the chick might freak out and turn me in or do whatever. I mean, the whole scene has become very dysfunctional. But 60% potentially suicidal. This is a huge number, even if it's made up. It's huge.
And I just met with one of our young viewers. He's visiting here in Uruguay now. He's 23, I believe, and but a young guy, obviously. And we were talking about a situation with a lot of his friends, people he went to high school with, and he's talking about with the men. It echoed these same ideas, and that basically the view of the future was really bad, meaning that they couldn't imagine a future that was better than their past. And so that sort of, that's got to cause enormous amounts of problems and for people if they can't imagine the future being any better than their past. And part of it is because, he's well-off kid, came from a good family with, that could make his life comfortable and relatively easy. And a lot of his peers were the same. And I think if you grew up in that environment where, the things that you need and might want or always seem to be around because of your parents' situation, and then, then you step out into your own as an independent adult and you start to understand, you have this crisis of meaning, realizing that you can't possibly recreate in an easy way with a life that was given to you as a kid. It's much easier when your parents are total failures like mine were, basically, where it's pretty easy to build from, It's much harder when your parents were successful.
That's a good point. Like, I'm a big fan of Billy Joel, both as a singer and a songwriter. He's actually a poet. And one of his songs that I rather like is called Allentown. And one line of it that I remember that's relevant to this is he's talking about the steel mills closing down in Allentown. And every kid had a pretty good shot to get at least as much as his old man got.
Yes.
But that's no longer the case.
That for young men makes a huge difference. That is because you're always in the shadow of your father. I think everyone is. And I know some friends that are actually someone we both know who his father's a very, very successful person. And I remember one night he and I were having too much to drink. And he said, even if I hit this crazy number, this, extreme level of wealth, I'll never be what my dad is. And I was like, holy crap. Like, I didn't understand the burden of that, but it actually legitimately is. It's, you don't want to cry over that, life being too good thing, but it is actually something that does trouble people, I think.
Yeah. I wonder if this relates well, I think it relates at least indirectly to this campaign that the Canadian government is mounting to assist people to commit suicide if they have a serious illness or if they're old and poor. I don't know what their parameters are exactly, but it's something that's going on in Canada at the moment.
Well, the one thing, I just was looking up some details on it, and apparently, basically being in poor physical health was the rationale for them for assisted suicide up until the newest law passed in 2021 that started to include people whose sole underlying condition is a mental illness. And so that was just recently added. And, I don't have a count on how many there were last year or since this took effect, but since 2016, when it became legal, this is through like August of last year, more than 30,000 Canadians have died with medical assistance.
That's a significant number. And it's not like Canada's a war zone.
Right.
Horrible things are happening and you feel like killing yourself because it's just such a disaster. So that's very significant.
They have in this article, they said in 2021, it accounted for 3.3% of Canadian deaths. But it has a couple of other countries here for context. In the Netherlands, assisted suicide accounted for 4.5% of deaths during that same period and 2.4% of deaths in Belgium.
Well, perhaps this is further proof that Western civilization itself is collapsing at this point, because there's a sense of hopelessness out there. Hopelessness and a complete lack of personal responsibility, although if you decide to kill yourself, perhaps you're taking responsibility for a poorly lived life. And you mentioned psychiatric conditions or mental illness are one of the reasons that they accept for helping you knock yourself off. And this article that I wrote in internationalman.com last week talked about psychiatry basically as a scam, and worse than a scam, an evil scam. So I really urge anybody watching this to go to internationalman.com and read the article, because
I'll put a link to it in the description of the video.
Yeah, because just as the Soviets used psychiatry as a means of crushing the opposition, say anybody that doesn't believe what we believe, Marxism, Leninism, has got to be mentally unbalanced or even crazy. And it's no longer a question of we don't share the same ideology. It's that if you don't believe what we believe, there's something really wrong with you. And they're medicalizing
dissent.
Yeah, that's exactly what's actually going on in this country now, where people that don't take vaccines from a number of sectors are being accused of exactly that. Because the wokesters today share the same philosophy, the same political views, the same economic views, all of them across the board, as the Soviets and the communists did. So we could make the argument that socialism itself, wokesterism, is a mental disease, but I have to double back on that, because does such a thing as mental disease actually exist? And I'd urge everybody to get a hold of a book, any of a number of books that he wrote, by Dr. Thomas Szasz. I knew him not well, and he died, I'm guessing 20 years ago now. But he made a life's work. He was a psychiatrist, which of course makes me suspicious. Anybody that's a psychiatrist makes me suspicious of them. But he came to the conclusion that mental illness was not an illness, that there were other causes for the things that are called by mental illness, because there's nothing physically diagnosable about it or curable about it. It's not like cancer or heart disease, where you can do something physical to make things better. And my own view, for what it's worth, is that people that have what appears to be a mental illness or a serious psychological aberration, it's generally speaking, I think, a cause of what they've done that has given them a sense of cognitive dissonance in their own minds. And it used to be that psychosis and neurosis were defined as moral insanity. And that's a definition that's fallen out of use. Because you can't cure moral insanity with Zoloft or Xanax or 100 of these other drugs that turn you into a zombie. So, and the people that are promoting this mostly are psychiatrists. And I'd say there's a good reason why Hannibal Lecter was portrayed as a psychiatrist, not as a shoe salesman.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this article you wrote is fantastic. Because, one of the things you talk about in there is the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And you compared that to an old book from the past. To what's that one called? The Malleus Maleficarum.
Oh yeah, Malleus Maleficarum. During the Middle Ages, they came up with this manual, and it was called the Malleus Maleficarum. I think it translates as the Hammer of Witches or the Hammer of Evil, where they listed all the things, how you can identify a witch when you see them, and what you should do to cure them, and all this. And that's exactly what this DSM is all about today. And it's actually become kind of a religion, but a very repressive religion, kind of thing that Catholicism had during the days of the Inquisition, especially.
Yeah, it's almost like it seems to me that there's some relationship between what is considered the cure to these, the hopelessness that people have, and the hopelessness itself. Because, when you look at that teen girl one of the things that they talked about in there, and you're not supposed to mention any of this stuff, but they talk about, how the girls that were depressed and suicidal, that it was much worse among those who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, questioning of their sexual identity, or another non-hetero gender identity. So they were much, much more affected by it. And you got to wonder, it's them. If they're being inundated with these ideas that deny their identity, the biological reality of what they can actually witness for themselves, it's got to fray at their consciousness and their sense of self in some way, doesn't it? I mean, have to.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's actually part of the process of making people crazy and not trusting their own minds. This is very serious. And the psychiatric profession is trying to agglomerate more power towards itself. Well, all entities, whether they be individuals or businesses or associations, try to gain power. And this is what the psychiatric associations trying to do. It's to make themselves more important. And there are two ways that psychiatrists approach a person that has problems. Well, in the past, when a person had problems that were making them do and say in crazy ways, well, on the one hand, you talk to a friend, or you talk to your preacher or priest or somebody that was in a position to dispense wisdom, and you walk it out, and that can work, okay? But it was free. It wasn't a scam where the guy gets to sit there for a 55-minute hour and listen to your rap, and then lets it bounce off of his own problems in psyche. A lot of psychiatrists become psychiatrists either because they're voyeurs and want to see the strange things going on in people's minds, or they're trying to solve their own problems. So, well, the so-called talking cure, which Freud formalized, I think it can make a lot of sense to talk out your problems and try to figure it out. But you're dealing, in as many cases as not, with a psychologically unstable and immoral or amoral person who's supposed to be giving you advice. So it's wrong, the wrong approach, and to have to pay a lot of money for this. But then what psychiatrists mostly do today is after they rap with you for a while with whatever ideas that they have, they like to prescribe any of these hundreds of psychologically active drugs that generally fuck you up, and they'll turn you into a zombie, and they will suppress the problems, not solve the problems, but make you
push it below the surface in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand, and who knows what the numbers really are, but something on the order of 25% of American society is on something from Ritalin on up at this point.
Mm. Well, and by basically, so the idea being though that these drugs, if they suppress the problem, then you know, based on what I read in your article, you were saying that, you thought that it was really driven by people's behavior, like behaving in a way, an evil way or something like that. Like they behave badly, and that's what, and so their psychological issues were related to their past behavior. And if they cannot reconcile that because it's too far below the surface, then it just grows.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the psychological problems that people have today have to do with moral failures on their part, where they have done something that was a failure to do something that was right, that's always on their mind, and it compounds, or they've done something actively wrong, and then that can compound, or they can't admit it to themselves. And this is why they start drinking or start doing one type of drug or another, or just can't deal with reality anymore because they feel too bad. So they can't hold down a job and they start living under a bridge. I mean, a lot of this has to do with actually moral insanity. And I'm not a religious person, but the fact that most of the West doesn't have any kind of moral foundations at all anymore, that Christianity, for all its faults, at least gave some kind of a moral framework, which is generally good, that people could work within and live according to and share beliefs. And that's vanishing and being replaced with things that are actually destructive, purposefully destructive.
Yeah,
like
I think that it's like what you see in these kids, what I heard from the guy who I met with the other day, and what I read in this Wall Street Journal article about teenage girls, it's just this despair, the despair for the future that they have. And I think that if it's without a moral compass or moral foundation where they can still feel like they're pursuing good, then it would naturally feel hopeless. But our only good really, that's, I think, sort of universally understood is this material success. That's like consumption of shit. Like that's considered like a good, and it's pursued. And then the other one, I guess, would be that you're famous or known or like treated special among others, so like that might be being, on this intersectional diagram where you're the most oppressed, where that is a good. And then without any real good that you can actually actively, successfully pursue, it's got to be despairing. It has to be.
Yeah. And of course, there are people and organizations, very few in the West, that are reacting against this and speaking out. And that's basically all you can do. I mean, it's not like you can eliminate these people. You can't push a button and have them go away. That's not possible. All we can really do is to speak out against it, and hopefully that you can wake up some of the woke. But the problem is that everybody sees in the media and sports and business with ESG, and absolutely in the government, which is run by Jacobins, actually, all around you, you live in an echo chamber of active evil and active stupidity. And that's got to have a really bad effect. It's like living in an insane asylum. If you live in an insane asylum, even if you're perfectly sane, after a while, it's going to start having a bad effect on you. And that's what's going on in the West generally.
Yes. Speaking of which, let me share my screen with you once again, because this reminds me of a story that we saw last week, came out in the New York Times, with this Yale professor suggesting that mass suicide for old people in Japan is probably the way forward.
Yeah, well, that is interesting, because with medical technology having advanced to the point where you can live way beyond your expiration date, as it were, in bad health, with your body falling apart, and perhaps with your brain actually deteriorating. What's the answer? Is society obligated to keep these people alive with tubes up their nose in a hospital bed just to keep them from dying? Well, first of all, society is not obligated to do a damn thing. And if you haven't oriented your life in such a way that you can support yourself when you're old and can't really work or do anything, well, whose damn fault is it? It's not society's, it's your fault. So that's number one. Society shouldn't keep people alive artificially, which is what it's doing today. Mm-hmm. It's the wrong thing. And putting it on a personal point of view, and if your friends and family don't want to support you, if you have some bad luck and you're older, well, why don't you have friends that are willing to do that for you?
Yeah,
it shows
a lot.
Yeah, if it's true, as has been said, and it's probably true, I think, that you're the average of the 5 closest people that you hang out with. Well, if your friends won't support you, they're all scumbags, and probably you're a scumbag that doesn't need to be supported. And I've got a lot of respect for a lot of primitive societies. I guess the Eskimos are most famous for this, that when you reach a certain, it's a society that doesn't have great abundance, or didn't in the old days. They're all drunk today, thanks to the welfare state and the Canadian government and so forth. But in the old days, when you realize that your time had come, and even your friends and family who might love you, they couldn't support you because there's just not enough goods to go around, what are you supposed to do? Well, what you're supposed to do is what that member of the Shackleton expedition did. I think it was that, he realized he was slowing the group down. You walk out into the cold, and that's the end of the story. Or step onto an iceberg or something like that.
Well, that's sort of what you've been describing, those like this individual accepting of responsibility, and it's not society's obligation to take care of you and all of that. But it seems like this guy has a little bit different angle on it, because here he says that his statements have primarily been taken out of context, and that he was mainly addressing a growing effort to push the most senior people out of leadership positions in business and politics to make room for younger generations.
Okay, well, how old should you be? I mean, look, you can be a wise elder. Okay, that's great. Because the older you get, the more experience you have, the more time you've had to think about things. So no, there's no particular reason to push somebody out because he's old, I don't think. But on the other hand, a man's got to know his limitations. And as you get older, frankly, you move slower, and you're not as capable in a lot of ways as you are when you're at your peak. It's like a bell-shaped curve. young, not very capable. There's the peak up here, and then you're on the slippery slope. So you got to know when your time has come. And these people like, Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein
And Biden.
Yeah, Biden. I mean, they're way past their expiration date.
Yeah, no, clearly. I mean, there's like some sense of honor and like, you have to move, like as an individual, you have to conduct yourself in an honorable way, not to be, especially if you're in a leadership role, your ego is not what it's about. I mean, as a leader, it's supposed to be about the job, and you should decide long before anyone else. It's like a great athlete who leaves before we have to watch them embarrass themselves on the field, like you don't play that long. It's bad for everybody. But the other thing with Japan, like I'm very suspicious of this guy and this sentiment though, among his generation, where they look at the older ones and feel like they're the problem. They're the consumers, they're in the way. And if they went away, then we would be better off. And that sort of like broad, lack of respect for elders, I guess, bothers me quite a bit.
Well, I would tie it back to the state once again, because with things like, and almost all the Western countries, this isn't true of the Orient, or for that matter, Africa, but Western countries with Social Security and Medicare equivalents, these old people are actually a drag on the economy, and they're significantly lowering the standard of living because they have to be forcibly supported. So this is the best argument for the abolishment of Social Security and Medicare and things of that nature, because it's creating intergenerational friction, because younger people realize, even if they don't understand anything about economics, hey, I've got to pay for these people. I've said for years, the time is going to come very soon when a young Hispanic male in Los Angeles is going to realize that he doesn't want to pay, 20% in Social Security, which is what it's going to have to go to pay for some old white broad in Massachusetts. It's creating all kinds of stress that shouldn't be there. So I blame this on the state.
Yes, I agree. And I think the state encourages these intergenerational rivalries, just like the intergender rivalries and the interracial rivalries. The state encourages that because it keeps people from looking at the real problem, which is the state, which enables us.
And stupidly, people look to the state to solve the problem that the state's caused. I mean, it's absolutely perverse. And I don't see how it can be turned around, because the only way you're going to get rid of Social Security and Medicare is when the whole system collapses. And when that happens, it's going to be really ugly. And, if a 100-story building is about to collapse, you're an idiot if you just let it collapse at random. What you need is a controlled demolition of the building. But who's going to do that at this point? I mean,
yeah, we talked at the last State of the Union. Remember, one of the things we commented on was the fact that Biden chided Republicans for some of them allegedly saying they want to do sunset Medicaid or Medicare and Social Security. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that at all. They were like adamant, no chance. This will never happen. Shows how bad the problem is.
Further proof that the Republicans are completely worthless. I mean, all they do is say, no, the Democrats are going too far and too fast in that direction. Let's slow things down a little bit. They have no moral principles at all. And actually, this is one way that I respect the Democrats more than the Republicans, because at least they have actual moral principles they try to live according to. They're shit moral principles, they're evil moral principles, but at least they try to observe them. The Republicans are just hypocrites at best. So,
well, and that's why they're winning. And I think that's what people don't understand, is that you need that moral foundation to win. Your ideas will win if you have that cohesive, thinking, the cohesive philosophy. And because the left has it, as insane as it is, they're going to win. And the right has nothing. And they won't, and they're not even, I don't ever imagine that being on the horizon, because our culture seems like we've destroyed all those things that might work, that might substitute.
Yeah, you know, years ago, I think it was possible for these political animals to say our friends on the left or our friends on the right, because they basically shared a culture, they shared values, and, you know, it wasn't so bad. But now you find Republicans saying our friends on the left, well, they're not your friends. They're actually your enemies that are looking to destroy not just you, but all of Western civilization. So I don't call them my friends. In fact, in day-to-day life, I don't like to associate with these people because they're poisonous and they're going to try to find, and they generally do, they almost can't help themselves, some way to screw things up.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, on that happy note, Doug, is there any prescriptions for improving the moral foundations or the psychological well-being of the population?
Of the population in general.
Like, what should you do for these kids that are growing up and have this deep sense of hopelessness? I mean,
one thing I would do, okay, if I'm a parent of a kid that's got problems, okay, I don't have any kids, so I don't have any kids that have problems. So what would I do, or what would I like to believe that I would do if I found that myself in that position? First of all, I pull my kid out of the cesspool he's swimming in. That's number one. Okay. Number two, that means homeschooling them. And maybe if you can change things, you know, kind of get back to basics. Do some hunting and camping and start teaching them skills other than navigating on their electronic device, which just is an even deeper cesspool that they're in. That's what you should do. That, and talk to the kid about values using the Socratic method. What do you think about this? Well, why do you think that? Can you explain it? And then simply asking questions as opposed to give the kid lectures, because when you give a kid a lecture, or give anybody a lecture for that matter, they kind of resent it. Nobody likes to have stuff crammed down their throat, even if it makes sense, they resist it. It's much better to ask questions and let them figure out the answers to the questions. It would be help them, give them some suggestions, but the Socratic method is the way. So that's what I would do.
That's good. So
charity begins at home.
So a lot of it is there. So a lot of it sounds like it's instilling greater connections with the non-abstract world, with the physical world around them, you know, where they're learning, like you said, actual skills, or, you know, you said hunting, stuff like that. So I wonder, do you think there's a relationship between engagement in the real world around us rather than the world of the abstract or the mediated reality of screens? Is there a connection between morality and that kind of behavior? I mean, does my question make sense? Like, did our sense of morals and ethics form from engagement with the real physical world, and by our lack of engagement with the physical world now, or does that necessarily lead to being less moral or less ethical?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really don't know. I guess the question is, can you be productive? And we define being productive as producing things that are necessary and things that other people, the market, want. So on a basic level, yeah, that's physical stuff. That's making stuff with your hands, but doing mental work. So not necessarily, but I think
but it becomes less obvious, doesn't it? Like whether or not, because I know there's that book that came out like 7 years ago called Bullshit Jobs. And it's talking about all the jobs in America that the employee knows that their job is bullshit. And they live kind of terrified in their work that their boss and their peers are going to find out that their job is bullshit. They know that the shuffling papers doesn't really mean anything.
Even worse must be government jobs, where if you've got half a brain, it's not only a bullshit job, most of the government jobs, but they're actually destructive, even worse.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting. I'm gonna think more about that, the connection between like positive feedback that you get through, you know, the lower and lower levels of abstraction and how that might connect to it. Because I just think when you start to abstract stuff, you can start to be, you know, you start to pursue like political standing, for instance, you know, and that like those things, you pursue that as a good. And it's, you know, and that totally would disconnect. You could feel like you're succeeding in creating value in the world if you're a DEI consultant, for example, right? If that's your job and you're getting more clients and your business is more successful and you're creating value in the world by like financial measurement, but clearly, but I seem that because it's not connected to reality, I think it might make the ethics of it not as easy to see.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I might mention that Mike Rowe, who had that program, Dirty Jobs,
Yeah.
He impresses me as a really solid guy.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Me too. And he's got a great charity that helps put people through these trade schools, I think. And that's, which is what, you know, we need a lot more of those people, and people doing those jobs tend to be more connected to reality. You know, it's like how the Canadian truck drivers tend to see the reality of what was happening. Why? Because they work in a reality that's, there's cause and effect. There's consequences by your actions that they can see clearly. And it makes it, I think, more obvious to them what reality is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what's happened with the Canadian truck driver movement at this point.
Sure, it's gone, but yeah.
I mean, the state his attempt to quash them any way possible. So
yeah, no, they'll win, I think. But all right, well, we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. It's good advice, and we'll talk about your other article next time we get together.
good. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.